Hello. In this video clip, I want to talk about validity and soundness. Now, in the last clip, I asked the question as to whether we could get more precise about what we meant when we said that a good deductive argument is such that its conclusion logically follows from its premises. And we can get more precise about that. So we'll say that a good deductive argument is such that its conclusion logically follows from its premises when it is valid. And we'll say that an argument is valid if and only if it is not possible that all of its premises are true, but its conclusion is false. Since this is a very important definition for our course, let me say it again. We'll say that an argument is valid if and only if it is not possible that all of its premises are true, but its conclusion is false. So let's give or characterize an intuitive test for determining when an argument is valid. So here's an intuitive test that you can employ to determine whether or not an argument is valid. And the test goes like this. Ask yourself, could there have been an internally consistent universe? Maybe one with a different past than our own, maybe even one with different laws of nature than our own. It just has to be internally consistent, in which all of the premises of the argument you're considering are true, but its conclusion is false. So ask yourself that question. Could there have been an internally consistent universe in which all the premises of the argument are true, but its conclusion is false? If the answer to this question is yes, then the argument you're considering is not valid. But if the answer to this question is no, then the argument is valid. So let's apply the test to our classic example of a deductive argument. So all humans are mortal. Socrates is human, therefore Socrates is mortal. Ask yourself, could there have been an internally consistent universe in which both the premises of this argument are true, but the conclusion is false? That is, could there have been an internally consistent universe in which it's true that all humans are mortal, Socrates is human, but it's not the case that Socrates is mortal? Well, clearly the answer to that question is no. Since the answer to that question is no, this argument is valid. It couldn't have been the case that there's an internally consistent universe in which its premises are true, but its conclusion is false, so it is a valid argument. Let's consider another example. Here's the argument. All humans can fly. That's the first premise. Socrates is human. That's the second premise. Therefore, Socrates can fly. So question, is this argument valid? Think about that for just a second. Okay, the answer is it is valid. Now, this might have confused you a bit because one of the premises of this argument, namely that all humans can fly, is false. So how can it be a valid argument? Well, in the technical sense of validity that we're concerned with, all that it takes for an argument to be valid is that its conclusion logically follows from its premises. And its conclusion logically follows from its premises just in case it's not possible that both of the premises are true, but the conclusion is false. And this argument has that property. It's not possible that both of the premises are true, but its conclusion is false. To see that, apply our intuitive test for validity again. Ask yourself, could there have been an internally consistent universe in which the premises of this argument are true, but its conclusion is false? Could there have been an internally consistent universe in which it's true that all humans can fly, Socrates is human, but Socrates can't fly? Or here's another way to think about it. Ask yourself, could you have written an internally consistent novel, maybe an internally consistent fantasy story, in which it's true that all humans can fly, Socrates is human, but it's not the case that Socrates can fly? The answer is that you could not have written such a novel. There could not have been an internally consistent universe in which it's true that all humans can fly, Socrates is human, but it's not the case that Socrates can fly. So since there could not have been such an internally consistent universe, since the answer to the question on this slide is no, we may conclude that this argument is, in fact, valid. Now, you might be a little bit puzzled by this, because we're calling this argument valid, but it clearly is defective in some way. It's clearly defective because it has a false premise. So do we have some term that allows us to say that the argument is defective in the way that it is defective? And the answer is yes. So we're going to introduce another term. We're going to say that some arguments are sound and some arguments are not. And we're going to say that an argument is sound if and only if it is valid and all of its premises are true. So let's look again at our classic example. All humans are mortal. Socrates is human. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. Now, we've already seen that this argument is valid. And assuming, at least for the sake of argument, that there are no immortal human beings, and that Socrates names a human being, both of its premises are true. So since this argument is such that both of its premises are true, and it is valid, it is what we call sound. So we have here an example of an argument that is both valid and sound. Okay, now let's look at our other example. All humans can fly. Socrates is human. Therefore, Socrates can fly. We've also seen that this argument is valid. However, the first premise of this argument is false. And since the first premise of this argument is false, it's not sound. Even though it's valid, even though the conclusion logically follows from the premises, since this argument has at least one false premise, it is not sound. Okay, let's look at another example. Here's the premise: the sky is blue. That's true. At least it's true today as I'm recording this, as you can see from behind me. Grass is green. That's also true. Therefore, dogs bark. Okay, so is this argument valid? Well, the answer to that question is no. Even though the premises of this argument are true, even though its conclusion is true, it's not a valid argument. To see that, again, apply our intuitive test. Ask yourself, could there have been an internally consistent universe in which the sky is blue, in which grass is green, but in which it is false that dogs bark? Or ask yourself the question this way: could you have written an internally consistent novel in which it's true that the sky is blue and the grass is green, but it's false that dogs bark? Well, in this case, the answer to that question is yes. You could have written such a story without contradicting yourself. There could have been an internally consistent universe in which the sky is blue, in which the grass is green, but in which it's not the case that dogs bark. Maybe in that universe there are no dogs to bark. Or maybe in that universe dogs are all mute. There's no logical contradiction in assuming those things. So this argument is not valid. And because it's not valid, it's not sound. Even though all of its premises are true, it's not sound because it's not valid. So for an argument to be sound, it's not good enough that all of its premises are true. it also has to be valid. For an argument to be sound, it's not good enough that it's valid. Its premises must also be true. Okay, note something that's a little bit confusing, and it's a confusion that arises because of a difference in the way that I'm using the term soundness and the way that your textbook uses the term soundness. So your textbook uses the term sound basically to mean what I mean by valid. So why is there this discrepancy between the way I'm using the term sound and the way that your textbook uses it? Well, it's not because I'm trying to confuse you, and I apologize for any potential confusion that there might be here. The reason is that this is a philosophy class, and so I'm going to use the terms valid and sound as philosophers often use those terms. But your textbook uses soundness in a different way. It uses it in a way that it's often used by logicians. Alright, note well, however, that the way I'm using the terms validity and soundness in this lecture is the way that I'll use them in future lectures as well as on the tests. So when I ask you about whether an argument is sound on the test, it's the definition that I provided in this lecture that I have in mind, not the definition that's given in your textbook, and I just wanted to make that clear. So to reiterate on this point, as I'm using the term valid, an argument is valid if and only if it's not possible that all of its premises are true, but its conclusion is false. And as I'm using the term sound, an argument is sound if and only if it's valid and all of its premises are true. Your textbook uses the word sound differently than I do. Your textbook means by sound what I mean by valid. Okay, so that's the end of this series of slides, and I'm going to give you a little worksheet on validity and soundness to help you master those concepts, and I'll also have a little video debriefing you on that worksheet that you can have access to after you've completed it. And then in the next lecture we'll make a few more fine-grained distinctions about the nature of validity.